Hey friends, this is Jeff. This is Around the Circle. I'm here with Cody Harris and Josiah Goff. Josiah Goff. I'm sure you've heard this at least once. I won't be the first one making this joke.
No, I have never heard this. What is this?
So for those who are into sports ball, in Detroit, they have a team called the Lions who has a quarterback named Jared Goff. And in that vicinity of the country, they go, that's the chant. And so I suppose.
Well, thanks for the introduction and the chant. That was a first for me.
Perfect. Well, hopefully it won't be the last because it's sticky. These gentlemen have a fantastic podcast on exclusively Enneagram Fives. Am I wrong?
That is correct. Yeah. We decided to niche down hard.
I like the niche. I'm all for a good niche. We're going to be talking about fives. I assume that a lot of our folks are going to be real interested in the inner life of male fives because that just doesn't get much attention. So if you guys are willing to go there, we're going to have fun. So 2 fives getting into the Enneagram. I said off mic, this, especially in male fives that I know, they generally can have a problem jumping into this material. So how did you get there?
So I think the first time that I got into the Enneagram was probably, I have a background in churches and stuff. I used to work in churches, and I am not affiliated with that those years in life. But when I was in that area of life, that chapter of life, Enneagram was talked about a lot in like religious circles and stuff. So I kind of heard about it, and then I remember looking it up and mistyped actually as a 1, which is a classic, I feel like, church thing to do as a man, is like be mistyped as a 1. But for a long time I thought I was a 1, and then I read about the 5 somehow separately from that, not taking a test, but just read the description, and yeah, that was it for me. It was like it hit so deep into my core. I was like, oh my God, this is like the first steps of actually learning about myself.
Nice.
So it's pretty revolutionary, yeah.
How long approximately have you been into it then?
Since I probably first heard about it in 2015.
Perfect.
I think. So yeah, about 10 years.
Yeah. Come on. How about you, Josiah?
Yeah. So I had been into personality typing systems for a while. I'm social dominant in my instinctual stacking. And so I am especially attracted to kind of any larger frameworks that help me make sense of the world and other people and all of that. And so, and I'd also grown up in the church and being involved in ministry. And so, you know, I think in high school took the DISC assessment and then got into Myers-Briggs and that sort of thing. And so I was a little more open to that stuff than maybe the typical person. And then in 2016, I think, I listened to a podcast episode. I think it was the Liturgist podcast, and they did a whole episode on the Enneagram. And I didn't really know anything about it. I'd heard them mention it a few times in the show, and then they were going through, you know, each number one at a time. And I remember when they got to the 4, I was like, yeah, that a lot of that kind of resonates with me because turns out I have a really strong 4 wing. Mm-hmm. And then when they got to the 5, I just wept. I had never felt so understood in my life. And so it did not take much for me to figure out that I was a 5 because they described, the description of the 5 describes my inner world so well. And so, yeah, that's how I got into the Enneagram.
Bang. And Michael Gungor, who's one of the co-hosts on that podcast, he's a 5, correct?
He is also a 5 wing 4, which is really funny because when I would listen to the podcast, he annoyed me the most. And it was because I was seeing a lot of stuff, I think, reflecting of myself, my attributes that I was not a fan of. And so, yeah.
That's fair. I myself am former ministry. Christianity is apparently a gateway drug for Enneagram in one's middle years. It seems to me that part of your story of coming through ministry into Enneagram may be one of the reasons. that a lot of fives that I speak to don't have for getting into Enneagram is that when you're doing Christian spirituality, you're already kind of in that world of looking inwardly and trying to put some language to what's going on inside, and maybe a little bit more open to that. Am I wrong in saying that?
I mean, I could see that. I know that for me, it had a lot to do with social dynamics and trying to understand other humans and how to interact with them and not feel like a weirdo all the time. So I was very, especially as a social five, very driven to solve that puzzle. So anything that helped me shortcut that process. So by, at least that's how I used to approach it, is like, okay, I can put you in this bucket. And so then I kind of know what to do with you. I know how to, I know how to interact with you. And so that's kind of what attracted me to it. But it was, I was exposed to it through the lens of, church leadership dynamics and that sort of thing. So yeah, I would say that it was definitely, like you said, a gateway into that stuff for me.
Yeah, I feel like too, like what I first time I ever heard about the Enneagram was because the church I was working in, the pastor's wife got like certified in it somehow and started like helping other people discover their types in the church. And so I definitely thought about it at the time as very like woo woo, not my thing. I don't know what this is. It's probably like Myers-Briggs, and I was never a huge fan of that. And so I kind of wrote it off. And it was actually like after you talked about the liturgist, Josiah, that reminded me that that's probably where I first heard it in a different light. And that was also right in my process of big time deconstruction and like really re-examining everything, because I went to seminary, and at the moment I went to seminary and graduated was the day that I started deconstructing.
Right.
And so it took a few years, but by the time I got to the end, I was so past it. And so like the Enneagram in some ways was kind of a part of my rediscovering kind of like community and what other people, what people could I get along with better. And, I was kind of like re-entering society outside of the evangelical, the cult-like communities. And so like you kind of go back out and you're like, oh my God, I got to be out in the world now. And so I think the Enneagram kind of helped me with that in terms of just like thinking through trying to get along with people in a different way. And so it meant a lot to me. It was actually on like the post side of my religious background, I think, that I really discovered and got into it.
Yeah. And
Strong.
Cody and I were going through all of this pretty much at the same time in the same apartment building in Nashville, because we've been friends for a very long time, and so we both were, as soon as we figured out we were fives, it's like, oh, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. Is there a secret five bond, hidden language? I guess it's shared assumptions at some level. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of resource management calculus goes on, and it's funny because I think we've been friends since 2008, and we've always been like the kind of friends where we can have big gaps between us hanging out, and then we can just kind of like come back together. And like we never spent any time apart, because we just had that like shared language and sort of shared view. And at the same time, also not really share super deep things about ourselves. Like it's so funny because we started the podcast in 2021. So 4.5 years ago. And only really since then, in the last few years, have we felt like we really know each other well, but we've been like best friends for almost 2 decades. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I feel like we needed that avenue to help us practice opening up and being vulnerable with each other and really practicing connection and sharing. And because we didn't have anything like that before we started the podcast.
Nice. I find, so my youngest is a 5, sexual 5, just freshman at Michigan. One of the things that is always a delight for me is we share skiing together, but skiing requires at minimum a 2.5 hour car ride. We don't start talking till 2 hours into the car ride, like actual talking, which I find wonderful. As a one, nearly all of my emotions and thoughts are pretty much out front. And the stoic nature of fives, the ability to kind of hold some stuff back, I always think is a virtue. And yet I assume that can be an obstacle at times in some of your relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, well, and for me, I have an added layer too, which is that I'm also on the autism spectrum. So I do hold things back, but I sometimes don't hold back the things I should hold back. You know, like I might be holding back a lot of like the personal things about my life or my personality, which I've been trying lately not to do and trying to grow in that aspect. But I also have this problem where like my thoughts have no filter to my mouth. So like, not only do I not talk about myself, at least historically, I would like not talk about myself, not open up to people, but tell people exactly what I think about them or like anything else. So I pretty much was always considered to be a jerk, I guess, in that way. And it was, I didn't get along with people very easily when I was younger.
Got house syndrome or what? Like
yes. Oh my God. That's a very good five personality to point.
Yes. And Cody and I binged that show when we were in our 20s. Like for a little while, yeah. I lived in his mom's basement and and we binged House and Dexter.
Yeah. And the OC.
Okay. Just as a side note, the last season of Dexter that they just released, which I imagine you've seen, was incredible.
I have seen it, and it was the best thing they've ever released.
It is. It was amazing. It was so good. Anyway,
wow.
Yeah.
Every single episode, I'd get to the end, and I'd look at my wife and be like, "Holy!" I don't know if you would catch
I got tools just in case, but
yeah. But no, I just was blown away. I couldn't believe how good it was.
If you're into vengeance and serial killers and cheering for somebody who offs bad guys, it's just a tremendous show.
Yeah.
My oldest is likewise neurodivergent, and I think that runs on my side of the family because I think my dad is as well. I'm sure I'm a professor in philosophy, so I'm sure I'm somewhere in there as well. So
it's required for the job.
It is. You just can't get through metaphysics without a little autism in your system. I want to back up to just this podcast. So for those who want to find it, I'm sure it's out there. This is what are they called? The Gungor Science Mike podcast.
Oh, the Liturgist
podcast. And yeah. I'm sure if you look up the Liturgist podcast Enneagram, it was one of the first things that was really well produced that got put out there. It supplemented Stabile and Cron's book at the time, and just there was so much energy around Enneagram at that point in time. But I want to go to your language that you said you felt seen in that material. Do you remember some of the things that really had the jolt, had the spark, really like popped for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was just the core five experience of needing to be competent and withdrawing to observe until we feel confident enough to engage. Because at that point in my life, I was so disassociated and detached and always in my head. And so when they talked about, and I thought there's something wrong with me, Right. I didn't understand that that's what was going on. And then when they talked about that, I realized that, oh, that's what I'm doing. And I tell myself that I need to step back, assess the situation so that I can get enough information to jump in. But then I never actually feel like I have enough information to jump in. And so I stay disengaged and I stay detached like all the time. And I realized that that's what I was doing. And then the other piece was the sort of energy management piece of it too, because that was another huge thing for me as a five. And I feel like I've had that on steroids a bit too, because I had really bad chronic fatigue in my teens and 20s. And I had some health stuff that I didn't realize was going on. And so I could sleep like 18 hours and wake up and still not feel rested. And it took everything I had to get out of bed in the morning. And so I had the like energy calculus on overdrive. Every single thing that could potentially be required of me, I had to go through this process of like, okay, thinking through all the different scenarios of what's going to be involved so that I can gauge whether or not I'm going to have enough energy to accomplish the thing. And then that process of doing the energy calculus was also very draining. And so I was just really drained like all the time. And so that was another piece that really resonated with me, because I realized that, I'm not broken. I've developed this set of strategies or coping mechanisms that, have helped me kind of get to where I am, but they're no longer helping me. So what can I do about it? And so it was a pretty big turning point for me.
Yeah. Turning point's a good bit of language because that's my experience as well. Cody, do you resonate with that, or was there something else?
I think what really drew me to the 5 aspect was kind of like when I was thinking that I was a 1, but then was really a 5. I think that difference was back then I really thought that I was this perfectionist type. I was really obsessive over certain things. Like it just kind of made sense, but I was like, it was the level of acceptance that I could feel from this, like reading Myers-Briggs, it's like very generalized and very like, okay, yeah, maybe this is me. I don't know. I didn't expect it to be so specific. And the things that stuck out to me about the 5 that really kind of resonated with me was kind of like the inner world aspect of being a 5 and being in your kind of more in your head all the time, being like, what is it we always say on the podcast, like a floating brain or a floating head. We just don't want to acknowledge our body. And then it honestly, I'm going to say this, for many years I was like, okay, I'm a 5, and I moved on and was like, okay, that's great. It wasn't until I started learning about stackings, and which was recently, it was in our show. We have Sam, who's kind of become our unofficial like third co-host, and
So Sam's also been on Around the Circle, and she's great. Sam Greenberg.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, going through that with her, I feel like is really when I started it really resonated. The difference between, because I've always felt like, okay, there's all these differences between me and a lot of other 5s, like Josiah, who is definitely the opposite of the self-preservation 5. And it doesn't surprise me, I guess, because we really are on both sides of the spectrum of 5 as far as we can be, for us to both be 5s, but then there's so many differences with our personalities and but then like the core parts are there. And I feel like that's kind of where I resonated the most, was like, okay, I've got those core fears, those core motivations, the fear of not being competent with something, the fear of, hesitating in my life and not taking those steps because I wanted to look at everything from every angle, and it would put me in just frozen, like freeze mode, right? I just couldn't do it. It would I would paralyze myself. And all of that started to really resonate with me. And I was like, okay, this is me. And then you put it in the self-preservation, stacking, that being the dominant one for me. I'm 100% comfort first. What makes me feel safe, what makes me feel comfortable. I love my space. I want it. I know that right now, if you're watching, I guess it's a video podcast as well. Yeah.
It will be. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I look like I'm in like a hostage situation right now because I'm in a new space that I haven't figured out what I'm going to do with the background yet. And so all of this is like soundproof blankets right now that's like cordoning me off. But I love my space. I love dedicating energy into my space and what makes me feel comfortable, and like that's my safe space. Nobody else is allowed in. Like this is where I can go to unwind, and so seeing all of that perspective really started to really hit home. I'm like, not only am I 5, but I'm 100% a self-preservation 5. There's no test that's ever going to tell me differently. Like I know it through and through.
It's an excellent story. So I think the hardest 2 numbers to understand are 2s and 5s. We could set 2s aside for a hot minute, but 5s put off a vibe for the rest of us, and we don't often have access into the inner world of the floating brain. When you hear about 5s, what are some of the misconceptions that come first to your mind?
Ooh, yeah. We talk about this a lot because, and this is actually a big part of the motivation for us starting the podcast, because especially at the time when we started it, we felt like there weren't a lot of resources that really went deep on the 5, because unless you're a 5, it's really hard to know what's kind of going on under the surface. Cause like you said, we have the gift of stoicism a lot of the time. And so often what happens is when people are talking about 5s, it tends to stay at surface level, and we wanted to go deep. And I think one of the biggest ones for me, especially with a strong 4-wing, is that people often think that 5s don't feel, that we're just kind of robots. And the reality is I feel deeply, and I have a very, very sensitive nervous system. I'm a highly sensitive person. And for most of my life, I hated that about myself. Like, I beat myself up because I thought I should be pure logic, but I had all of this like weird wiring that made me really sensitive to a lot of different stuff. But I didn't know how to manage any of it. I didn't have any emotional intelligence, and I didn't know how to process emotions. I was afraid of my own emotions. I was definitely afraid of expressing them. And then, so I would just try to stuff all of it down, and then it will come out and explode in really stupid ways that then made me like go into a separate shame spiral around that. And I think that has been, I think, probably one of the most harmful misconceptions about 5s is that we don't feel. And I'm saying that from other people thinking we don't feel, and then like from our perspective thinking that we shouldn't feel. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. That was basically, I think we both shared that view that was one of the most harmful things that people view about 5s. So we started the podcast in that framework. And I would say too, but I mean, I was way more terrified of starting the podcast than he was, to be fair. But for all of the reasons that are true about 5s, some of those stereotypes, I did not want to put myself out there. I did not want to, be super honest on a podcast. And so we started it with the premise of maybe nobody will ever hear this, and this can be just for us. And that's the most 5 thing to do, right?
Yes,
and
we hacked our own brains, and we just created a series of experiments. And so we said, the first one was, would we even enjoy sitting down and recording? It doesn't have to go anywhere. We don't even have to publish it. We can just sit down and record and see how it goes. And then we did it, and we really enjoyed it. And we're like, oh, this really resonates. This just felt really good. And then it was like, okay, well, if we put it, out into the world, would anyone listen to it? And then we published it. And within the first week, we were already in the top 10% of podcasts. Like, that's how strongly it resonated with people. And we're like, okay, well, I guess this is what we're doing now. And then, then we had, like, I had a very much a pullback of, oh no, this feels way too vulnerable and exposed. And then we've kind of gone through fluctuations of, like, we did seasons where we took some time off, and because there was, a lot going on, but also a lot of internal resistance too of people are actually listening, and that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it was a really hard thing for me to do for a really long time, especially because Josiah would never let me know what the episodes were about until we were starting to record. And so I always went into it. So when you hear that cold open where he asks me a question for the first, I don't know how many, we were at 58 episodes now. So for the first, let's say 50 episodes, I had no idea what was happening. And that cold open is very honest and authentic, because I never knew what we were going to talk about.
But I did that on purpose so that we wouldn't overthink it. Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah. No, and you were very intentionally hijacking my system in that way, and trying to help me overcome my own fears. But I mean, if it wasn't for that podcast, I mean, it was super therapeutic for me, and has been up until this point, even more so now, maybe because we've spent the first so many years talking through a lot of those stereotypes and a lot of those things, and we were just talking about things we had been through and not necessarily what we were currently going through. We just did an episode on this, actually, that just came out this past week, about what a stereotype about, that 5s oftentimes think that they are better off alone and, like, remove themselves from society altogether, and how that can be, that's a stereotype, but that's a stereotype of us in some of our worst and darkest places, and that can affect us, and that can be the narrative inside of our minds. And we talked a lot about that whole process of where what was it you said? You quoted somebody. It was from our community, actually, right? It was.
I don't remember where the quote came from, but essentially it was the difference between transparency and vulnerability, where transparency is looking back and being open about what has happened, and vulnerability is about being open about what's going on right now. And that gave me some good language to realize like this was a conversation that I had been avoiding, and I've been talking around it on different episodes in the podcast because I'm still in the thick of it. And it's just, I don't have an answer because I know logically I should feel like, you know, I shouldn't have this voice in my head telling me that I'm better off alone. And like, I know that I want connection. I know that like, I love my family and I love my friends and all that, but there's still a part of me, and I don't know if it'll ever go away, that is always looking for evidence that it's not okay to be who I am, that, you know, I need too much alone time, that I'm not, you know, sensitive enough to other people's feelings, that, you know, the things that I need are a burden on other people. So it would be much better if I just sequestered myself off into this little corner and, you know, created my own environment until I felt ready and my nervous system was ready to engage, and then I could be at my best at all the time. But like, that's not how life works. But there's still a voice in my head trying to convince me of that. And I wanted to be able to show up to a conversation having worked through that already. And instead we just had a conversation about this is where I am in the middle of it. And that I think was kind of a pinnacle moment for us, because we've sort of tiptoed into that territory at different times, but we really jumped in this last episode.
Yeah. And it was definitely like, okay, this is where the show is now heading, because we've gone through all of those things. We've kind of ran out of material of all the stuff we have been through and are now only talking about, like, we're starting to open up about those things that we are now going through. So it's transitioned, I think, from transparent to vulnerable in that way, which was the thing I was most terrified of when we first started recording the show. But had we started with vulnerable, I never would have done it. I never would have gotten through the episodes. And so it's taken, what is this, 4 years of doing this show and preparing me to be in a place where I can be vulnerable about what I'm going through now. And now I'm still scared to death of it, but in like an exciting way, you know? So it's a little bit different. But yeah, but we've gone through so many episodes of stereotypes, and I think now if you listen to the show as a whole, you hear that progression for both of us, both individually and together as friends, trying to just work our way through what it means to be a 5 in this world, and not succumbing to a lot of what people generally think about when they think about 5s. I think we can easily be our own trope. We can be our own, you know, stereotype and almost like give ourselves that narrative. And so I feel like because we're so different, because we other ourselves so often in groups, and that's something that I feel like I can always walk into a room and pretty much guess really quickly who the 5s are, because just look for the walls, look for the edges of the room, look for the ones who aren't participating and just don't want to be a part of the group, because that's so often the stereotype, right? But like, go and sit down with one of those 5s, have an amazing conversation. That's usually who I gravitate towards, because like in those situations we can both feel safe in our discomfort, you know. But yeah, so all that to say, I think that there's a lot more to be said about like those surface level things, and you can talk about with 5s, and then as soon as you start to break under the surface, you realize that there's all these other layers that maybe we ourselves don't even explore, because we just like to leave it on the surface level, because that is something 5s love to do.
Yeah, I think you touched on another misconception about 5s here, which is that we don't like people and we're antisocial. And there have been times in my life where I have convinced myself and others that is true, for sure. But especially as a social 5, like I really crave that connection and need those relationships, and I've had to figure out how to, like, my own strategies for getting to the point where I can connect with people and go into social settings without being completely drained. A lot of that is actually leaning into my 7 and the fact that, you know, Cody and I both are performers. He's a musician. I'm a former musician. And so I've spent a lot of time on stage, and
7 years,
7 years of show choir. That's a running joke because I always say it. This was the one time I was not going to say it, Cody. You said it for me. But that allows me to sort of, that actually is a way for me to kind of get out of my head a little bit and be more outgoing enough to sort of signal that I'm open for connection and for relationship, and that helps me engage in social settings. But especially if I'm drained or I'm just like not feeling it, I will definitely come across as antisocial and probably feel antisocial a lot of the time, but it's not actually where I am. It's just, it really goes back to what my resources are at any given moment.
I want to pull some of this back a little bit for the rest of us. When you think about your own emotional life, what's your experience of what's your relationship with your emotions? Does it feel observational, as though you're observing how you feel? Or would you characterize it more as I feel how I feel?
Cody, do you want to go first?
Sure. I was very sure before we started the show that I might be a sociopath. And we did a whole episode on it, actually, if I was a sociopath or not. Turned out I wasn't. And by the time we did the episode, I didn't think I was anymore, to be fair. But it was a fun conversation because...
Did you get like the DSM out and like, okay, do you actually fall under these categories?
We had a therapist come on the show and talk about it with us.
Is Cody a sociopath?
Yeah, my friend Liz, who's on the West Coast, and I just found out has her own podcast, and it's she came on the show and we had a lot of fun talking about whether or not I was a sociopath, and she's an 8, so like she really like attacked us in all the right ways, and we had a lot of fun in that conversation. But I spent most of my life thinking that I didn't have empathy or feelings. I really, truly didn't believe I had empathy, and I operated as though I didn't have empathy. And that was something that I realized. It took me until my mid-30s before I realized that a lot of that that process that I would go through with people when it came to emotions, and especially emotions that made me uncomfortable, was that I was probably just masking that numbness and allowing myself to do that as a defense mechanism, because I didn't want to share those parts about myself with other people either. And it wasn't, I didn't really have relationships that were worth feeling those emotions to me either. Like I never really let people in that close, and I wouldn't let myself open up like that to other people either. And so I spent many, many, many years, pushing down my emotions and pretending they didn't exist. And instead that would come out in all of the worst ways. That was also pre-autism diagnosis. So there's a lot of things I didn't understand about myself that made me a very volatile person emotionally, because I was pushing all this emotion down. I wouldn't let myself cry. I wouldn't let myself do anything, and we live in the South. So like that's very encouraged for men to not show emotion in society, in this part of the country. And so, and even in churches, right? Men are supposed to be like these manly men that only cry when like Jesus touches them or whatever. And so I think that it's a challenge. It's a challenge for a 5 to grow up in that context. And both my parents, my dad's a 5 and my mom's a 4 wing 5. And my brother's a 5. So I had the most 5 household you could possibly imagine, which is pretty devoid of a lot of emotions. Everything is pretty on surface level for most of my life. And so it took me till way after church. And so I started to realize, and kind of being on my own, and also being in a relationship that with a 6 who is very empathetic and very, very in tune with her emotions, to make me start seeing like the benefits of understanding what my actual emotions are and being able to feel them instead of process them. Like that is definitely a very poignant, I guess it's a very, very true stereotype, I think, of 5s, because I definitely want to naturally observe my feelings more than I want to, and process them more than I want to feel them. And for most of my life, I didn't know the difference between processing and feeling. I thought processing was feeling. When you process your emotions, you understand yourself better. You know where those emotions come from. Now I've got this entire game plan written out in my own mental playbook that tells me exactly how to get through these emotions that I am now processing. And I never felt the emotions. And so I definitely went the majority of my life not knowing how to feel anything. And it was a really, really crazy and revolutionary idea to just feel them and not have to have a reason for feeling them. That was something that I'd never allowed myself for most of my life.
Yeah, I echo that. And I wrote a newsletter a couple of months ago because we have a newsletter for our community as well. And it was you don't have to understand your emotions to feel them. And as a 5, that seems so counterintuitive. And because my go-to, my default, it's like I'm having a feeling. The second I recognize that I'm having a feeling, I jump to, okay, where's this feeling coming from? You know, why am I having it? When was the first time I had this? Like, does this go back to childhood, or is this something that's going on right now? You know, and I'm like attacking it from all these different angles, pulling it apart, you know, trying to process it, like he says. And what I've had to do a ton of work on this for the last decade and a half, because I am married to a 4-wing 5 who is deeply feelings oriented, deeply emotionally intelligent. And so, you know, in order to have a marriage that lasted, I have to figure out how to at least meet her part of the way there. I say we're each standing on each side of the chasm, trying to figure out how to meet in the middle down there. And I think one of the big things for me has been connecting more with my body and understanding that, well, first of all, just like appreciating that I have a body. That's a huge step actually for me, is just appreciating that I have a body and recognizing that there's really no separation between my mind and my body. That's an illusion. Like my body is giving all of the inputs. It's sending all the signals that, you know, allows my brain to process things. And I want to pretend like it doesn't exist. But just because I can understand an emotion doesn't mean that I've let my body sense it and feel it and let it move through my body. And so my body just sort of carries a lot of extra stuff because I'm not letting myself feel and move through those things. And that's been a journey for me over the last several years, is getting to the place where I will catch myself a good percentage of the time now. I'm actually pretty proud of myself. Like a good percentage of the time, I'll catch myself. I'm having a feeling, and then I'll start to unpack it. I'm like, wait, stop. I can always come back and try to understand the feeling later, but I can never, like, feelings don't feel the same later as they do now. I can't recreate that later. So I'm just going to sit with it for a minute. It doesn't have to be forever, just like for a minute, and let myself feel the feeling without trying to analyze it. And just noticing where it's in my body, you know, noticing what the sensations are, and just letting myself sit with it so that I can process through it. And then I can always come back and analyze things later. And honestly, most of the time, I don't even really feel the need to come back and analyze the things, because I feel like I've let it move through me. And it seems so weird that this works. Like to my brain, it shouldn't work, right? But that has been one of the big things for me as a 5 is learning that process and accepting that I have a body and that there's a lot of benefits to listening to it and taking care of it. And yeah.
Hey friends, it's Jeff. We're going to pick up the second half of this conversation at aroundthecircle.org. If you enjoyed this, just strongly suggest going over there, taking a look at what we have going on. Even our free members get half of all of our extra content over there. Lots of good stuff to look at. But really enjoyed this conversation with Josiah and Cody. So do check it out. Their podcast, again, is the Enneagram 5 Podcast. Very easy to find on iTunes and Spotify. And just appreciate the hell out of these guys. And with that, we're going to sign off.
But, you know, we've eased into it over 4 years, I guess.
I want to come back to that transparency and vulnerability idea. That's going to sit with me for a while. So I appreciate that element of this conversation. They're Cody Harris and Josiah Goff. They lead the Enneagram 5 podcast. Where can folks find you and connect if they want to?
Yeah, so I would say the first place would just be opening up the podcast app that you're listening to right now and searching for Enneagram 5. You'll see us come up, spelling out the 5 especially will show up, and going and starting at the beginning of the podcast, because it's been a journey. You can see, if you go from the beginning and kind of listen all the way through, it's a very good insight into how we have evolved over the last 4 years in a lot of different ways, including our own relationship, and we've been through a lot in those 4 years, and we kind of take the listener along the way. So you can look us up there, and we'll have in the show notes of any episode, you'll have any relevant links to go down the rabbit hole a little further.
Friends, it's been a delight. Dear listener, after you watch Dexter Resurrection, do check out their podcast. I'm really looking forward to having you guys on again in the future as we move forward together. I've just really enjoyed our conversation and just cheering for you.
Yeah.
And we'll pick it up next time. Hey friends, it's Jeff. We're entering a new season. We have started 4 new podcasts on this channel and are working on our second book and hoping to elevate more voices in the Enneagram world over the coming year. If these episodes are important to you, there's 3 things you can do for us. First, you can buy a copy of our first book, Around the Circle, on Amazon for yourself and your 10 closest friends for Christmas. Second, you can review that book or our podcast with a note, 5 stars. This really helps people find our feed. And best of all, you can go sign up as a member at aroundthecircle.org. Even free members get half of the stuff that we post there. So go. Books, stars, memberships. This will allow us to create great content for years to come. Appreciate all you all. Appreciate your notes of encouragement, and may all good things be yours.